In 1852, the Grand Woodhaven Plantation in the South Carolina Low Country housed more than just cotton fields and enslaved families. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood commissioned a portrait from a mysterious traveling artist, a portrait that would curse his bloodline and every subsequent owner of the estate. For over 170 years, the oil painting has wept crimson tears that stain the ornate frame, and anyone who dares to own the plantation disappears without explanation, leaving behind only empty rooms and unanswered questions. What began as a symbol of Southern aristocratic power became a vessel of supernatural vengeance. The enslaved community whispered of curses and blood oaths, while the portrait's eyes seemed to follow visitors through the mansion's corridors. Each new owner, from Reconstruction carpetbaggers to modern real estate developers, has vanished after months of owning the cursed estate, their fates as mysterious as the bleeding portrait that hangs in the master's study. Recent investigations in 2024 uncovered hidden chambers beneath the plantation house, filled with artifacts that suggest the original artist may have been practicing dark rituals involving the blood of the enslaved. Forensic analysis of the portrait's paint reveals human hemoglobin mixed with the pigments, creating a grotesque masterpiece that seems to pulse with malevolent life. The South Carolina Historical Society has documented 17 different owners who have disappeared since 1852, making Woodhaven Plantation one of America's most cursed properties. The enslaved quarters, now crumbling ruins, still echo with whispers of the original curse. Descendants of those who worked the fields speak of their ancestors' final revenge against their oppressors, a blood pact that ensures no master will ever rest easy at Woodhaven again. Chapter 1. The Commission. 173 years ago, in a plantation house overlooking the Ashley River in South Carolina, military records and local newspapers mentioned an artist so disturbing that his name was eventually erased from official documents. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood vanished from historical records after commissioning what would become known as the most cursed portrait in American history. The absence left scars so deep in the community that generations of silence followed, marking the beginning of a supernatural curse that continues to claim victims to this day. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. The year 1852 marked the height of South Carolina's plantation prosperity, when cotton profits reached unprecedented levels and enslaved labor generated immense wealth for white landowners. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood owned over 400 enslaved people across 3 plantations, making him one of the state's most powerful slaveholders. His main estate, Woodhaven Plantation, sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime low-country land, its grand mansion serving as a symbol of antebellum aristocracy. But Blackwood harbored darker ambitions than mere wealth accumulation. Local church records mention his growing obsession with preserving his legacy through unconventional means, and correspondence with Charleston mystics suggests he believed in supernatural methods of ensuring his family's eternal dominance. When a mysterious artist calling himself Erasmus Grimm arrived at Woodhaven in the spring of 1852, Blackwood saw an opportunity to commission more than just a traditional portrait. Grimm claimed to practice sanguine artistry, a technique that allegedly captured not just physical likeness, but the very essence of the subject's soul. Enslaved witnesses later told their descendants that Grimm's painting sessions required strange rituals, including the collection of blood from unwilling participants in the slave quarters. The artist worked exclusively at night, his studio lit by candles arranged in occult patterns that terrified even the mansion's house servants. The commission took 3 months to complete, during which time several enslaved people died under mysterious circumstances. Their bodies showed signs of blood loss that couldn't be explained by known injuries or illnesses. Grimm mixed their blood into his paints, creating pigments that seemed to glow with an unnatural luminescence. The finished portrait depicted Blackwood in his military uniform, but the eyes held a malevolent intelligence that unnerved everyone who gazed upon it. When Grimm delivered the completed work in August 1852, he warned Blackwood that the portrait would ensure his legacy endures beyond mortal comprehension. Within days of hanging the painting in his study, Blackwood began experiencing violent nightmares and waking visions of the enslaved people he had brutalized. The portrait's eyes seemed to track his movements, and servants reported hearing whispers emanating from the canvas during the night. The first signs of the curse manifested when the portrait began weeping tears of blood exactly 1 month after its completion. The crimson drops stained the ornate golden frame and pooled on the study floor, defying all attempts to clean or remove them. Blackwood became increasingly paranoid, convinced that his enslaved population was plotting against him through supernatural means. His behavior grew erratic as he spent hours staring at the portrait, searching for answers to the growing horror in his home. On October 13, 1852, exactly 3 months after the portrait's completion, Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood disappeared from his locked study. The room showed no signs of struggle, no broken windows or forced entry. The portrait hung undisturbed on the wall, its painted eyes now seeming to hold a satisfied gleam. Search parties combed the plantation grounds for weeks, but no trace of Blackwood was ever found. The only evidence of his fate was a pool of dried blood beneath the cursed painting. The enslaved community whispered that their ancestors' spirits had finally claimed their oppressor, using Grimm's dark artistry as a conduit for supernatural justice. The portrait's bleeding continued, marking the beginning of a curse that would claim every subsequent owner of Woodhaven Plantation. What started as one man's vanity project had become an instrument of eternal vengeance, ensuring that no master would ever find peace within the plantation's walls. Chapter 2. The pattern emerges. The disappearance of Colonel Blackwood created a legal nightmare that haunted South Carolina courts for decades, but the true horror was just beginning to unfold. Reconstruction-era records from the Charleston County Courthouse reveal a disturbing pattern. Every person who claimed ownership of Woodhaven Plantation vanished without explanation, leaving behind only the bleeding portrait and unanswered questions. The curse that began with Blackwood's commissioning of supernatural art had evolved into something far more systematic and terrifying. Blackwood's estate fell into legal limbo when his will couldn't be executed without a confirmed death. His younger brother, Captain Marcus Blackwood, arrived from Virginia in 1853 to claim the plantation and resolve the family's financial obligations. Marcus initially dismissed the enslaved community's warnings about the cursed portrait, viewing their fears as primitive superstition. He moved into the master bedroom and hung the bleeding painting in his private study, confident that military discipline would overcome whatever supernatural nonsense plagued the estate. The enslaved population, now under Marcus's even harsher rule, watched with grim satisfaction as the curse began its work. Within weeks of his arrival, Marcus reported disturbing dreams where the portrait's subject, his missing brother, beckoned him into the painted canvas. The blood tears continued flowing from the painting's eyes, and Marcus found himself compulsively cleaning the crimson stains every morning, only to find them renewed by evening. Marcus lasted exactly 7 months. On a humid August night in 1854, plantation overseer Samuel Dixon discovered the master bedroom empty, its windows locked from the inside. The portrait in the study had fresh blood pooled beneath its frame, and witnesses reported seeing a figure walking through the mansion's halls moments before Marcus's disappearance. Like his brother before him, Marcus Blackwood left no trace of his fate except for the supernatural evidence that the curse remained active. The pattern that would define Woodhaven's dark legacy was now established. New owners would arrive with skepticism, dismiss the supernatural warnings, and vanish within months of taking possession. The portrait seemed to feed on their disbelief, growing more malevolent with each disappearance. Local newspapers began referring to the estate as the Widowmaker, though they never reported the full extent of the supernatural occurrences. During the chaos of reconstruction, carpetbagger investors saw Woodhaven as a profitable opportunity despite its growing reputation. Northern industrialist Benjamin Crawford purchased the plantation in 1867, planning to convert it into a lumber operation. He arrived with modern sensibilities and scientific skepticism, viewing the locals' warnings as backward southern superstition designed to keep outsiders away from valuable land. Crawford documented his experiences in detailed letters to his wife in Boston, providing the most comprehensive account of the portrait's supernatural behavior. He described how the painting's eyes seemed to follow him through the study, how the blood tears appeared fresh each morning despite his efforts to clean them, and how he began hearing whispers in languages he couldn't identify. The letters abruptly stopped in March 1868, when Crawford joined the growing list of Woodhaven's vanished owners. The enslaved community, now technically free but still working the land as sharecroppers, maintained their oral traditions about the curse. They spoke of how their ancestors had channeled their collective suffering into the portrait through Grimm's blood-infused paints, creating a supernatural trap that would ensure no oppressor ever found peace at Woodhaven. Each disappearance validated their belief that justice, though delayed, was inevitable. By 1870, Woodhaven Plantation had gained a notorious reputation throughout the South Carolina Lowcountry. The bleeding portrait had become local legend, and potential buyers were warned away by stories of the vanished owners. Yet the curse's power seemed to attract certain individuals, those driven by greed, skepticism, or dark curiosity, ensuring that new victims would continue to present themselves to the supernatural force dwelling within the painted canvas. The pattern was clear. The portrait didn't simply kill its victims, it consumed them entirely, leaving no physical evidence of their fate, while adding their essence to its growing malevolent power. Each disappearance made the painting stronger, its blood tears more frequent, and its supernatural influence more pronounced throughout the plantation grounds. Chapter 3. Blood and Buyers. The turn of the century brought new waves of fortune seekers to South Carolina, but Woodhaven Plantation's reputation for consuming its owners had grown into regional folklore that deterred most rational investors. Court records from Charleston reveal that between 1870 and 1900, 17 different individuals or companies attempted to purchase the cursed estate, and every single one vanished within months of taking possession. The bleeding portrait had become the focal point of a supernatural phenomenon that seemed to grow stronger with each disappearance. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this story. I want to know how far these silenced accounts reach. Railroad Baron Harrison Fairfax represented the Gilded Age's confidence in industrial progress when he purchased Woodhaven in 1889. Fairfax planned to demolish the mansion and convert the plantation into a rail depot, viewing the supernatural stories as profitable folklore that kept competitors away from valuable commercial property. He brought teams of workers from Atlanta and established temporary headquarters in the plantation house, dismissing local warnings as backward superstition. The enslaved descendants who still lived on the property watched Fairfax's arrival with knowing dread. They had witnessed this pattern for decades. Outsiders arrived with modern confidence, scoffed at the curse, and inevitably joined the portrait's collection of vanished souls. The older residents, whose grandparents had known the original enslaved community, maintained detailed oral histories of each disappearance and the specific ways the portrait had claimed its victims. Fairfax's personal journal discovered in his Atlanta office after his disappearance, provides chilling insight into the portrait's psychological warfare. He described how the painting's eyes seemed to track his movements throughout the study, how the blood tears appeared fresh each morning despite his orders to have them cleaned, and how he began experiencing vivid nightmares featuring all the previous owners who had vanished before him. The railroad magnate lasted 4 months. His work crews reported strange phenomena throughout the plantation: tools disappearing overnight, unexplained sounds from the mansion's upper floors, and the overwhelming sense of being watched while working near the main house. Several workers quit after claiming they saw figures in Civil War-era clothing walking through the rooms at night, figures that matched descriptions of the vanished Blackwood brothers. Fairfax's disappearance differed from previous victims in one crucial detail. Witnesses saw him enter the study on the night he vanished, but when they checked an hour later, the room was empty, despite the door being locked from the inside. The portrait's blood tears were flowing more heavily than ever before, and several workers claimed they heard Fairfax's voice calling for help from somewhere within the painted canvas itself. The early 1900s brought a new type of buyer to Woodhaven: collectors of supernatural artifacts who viewed the cursed portrait as a valuable addition to their occult collections. Wealthy mystic Madame Evangeline Roster purchased the plantation in 1903, planning to study the portrait's supernatural properties and potentially harness its power for her spiritualist practices. She arrived with equipment for documenting paranormal phenomena and a team of assistants trained in occult research. Roster's approach represented a dangerous evolution in the curse's victims. Unlike previous owners who stumbled into the supernatural trap through ignorance or skepticism, she actively sought to engage with the portrait's dark power. Her detailed notes, found scattered throughout the mansion after her disappearance, revealed that the painting responded aggressively to attempts at supernatural investigation. The spiritualist documented how the portrait's bleeding increased during occult rituals, how the painted figure seemed to move slightly between observations, and how voices emerged from the canvas during seances. Her final entry, dated 3 weeks before her disappearance, warned that the portrait contains not one soul but many, all bound together in eternal suffering and rage. She vanished along with her entire research team, leaving behind only blood-stained notes and equipment destroyed by some tremendous supernatural force. By 1910, Woodhaven Plantation had become what local newspapers called the graveyard of ambition. The pattern was undeniable. Successful, confident individuals purchased the property with grand plans, only to vanish mysteriously within months. The portrait's blood tears had stained the study floor so deeply that the wooden planks had turned permanently crimson, creating a macabre monument to the curse's growing power. The descendant community, now scattered throughout the Low Country, but still connected by oral tradition, viewed each disappearance as validation of their ancestors' supernatural justice. They had watched for 6 decades as the portrait claimed oppressor after oppressor, ensuring that no master would ever find peace at Woodhaven. The curse had evolved beyond simple revenge into a self-perpetuating supernatural phenomenon that seemed destined to continue claiming victims indefinitely. Chapter 4. Modern Monsters. The Great Depression brought a temporary reprieve to Woodhaven Plantation as economic hardship reduced the number of potential buyers willing to risk purchasing cursed property, but the 1940s introduced a new breed of owner: war profiteers and industrial magnates who viewed supernatural stories as quaint folklore that couldn't interfere with serious business ventures. Federal records from the Bureau of Land Management reveal that government officials investigated Woodhaven multiple times during this period, though their findings were classified and remain sealed to this day. Munitions manufacturer Victor Cromwell purchased the plantation in 1943, planning to convert the grounds into a testing facility for military explosives. Cromwell represented the wartime mentality that science and industry could overcome any obstacle. including supernatural curses that had plagued a southern plantation for nearly a century. He brought modern equipment, security personnel, and government contracts that promised to transform Woodhaven into a profitable wartime enterprise. The descendant community, now living in Charleston and surrounding areas, watched Cromwell's arrival with the same grim anticipation their elders had shown previous owners. 4 generations had passed since the original curse, but the oral traditions remained strong, and elderly residents still remembered their grandparents' stories about the bleeding portrait and its supernatural power. They knew that modern skepticism wouldn't protect Cromwell any more than it had protected his predecessors. Cromwell's military background led him to approach the supernatural phenomena with tactical analysis rather than fear or dismissal. His classified reports to government supervisors, partially declassified in the 1990s, document systematic attempts to understand and contain what he termed anomalous psychological warfare potential. He installed motion sensors around the portrait, recorded the blood secretions for laboratory analysis, and maintained detailed logs of all supernatural manifestations. The war contractor lasted 6 months, longer than most previous owners due to his methodical approach and government protection. His final report, submitted days before his disappearance, concluded that the artifact demonstrates properties that exceed current scientific understanding and may represent weaponizable psychological warfare technology. Government investigators found his research equipment destroyed and his security team unconscious with no memory of the night he vanished. The 1950s brought corporate buyers who viewed Woodhaven as prime real estate for suburban development. Housing developer Thomas Ashford purchased the plantation in 1955, planning to demolish the mansion and build a residential subdivision on the valuable low-country property. Ashford represented post-war American optimism and the belief that progress could overcome any historical burden, including supernatural curses rooted in slavery and violence. Ashford's construction crews reported immediate problems when they attempted to work near the mansion. Heavy machinery malfunctioned without explanation, workers experienced unexplained injuries, and several crew members claimed they saw Civil War-era figures standing in the plantation house windows. The bleeding portrait, still hanging in the study despite decades of ownership changes, seemed to intensify its supernatural activity in response to threats of demolition. The developer's fate provided perhaps the most documented disappearance in Woodhaven's history. Multiple witnesses saw Ashford enter the mansion on the morning of his vanishing, but when business partners arrived for a scheduled meeting, they found only the bleeding portrait and evidence of some tremendous supernatural event. The study's walls were splattered with blood, furniture was overturned, and the portrait's tears were flowing so heavily that crimson puddles covered the floor. Police investigators couldn't explain the physical evidence or determine what had happened to Ashford. The blood splatter patterns suggested extreme violence, but no weapons were found, and forensic analysis revealed that the blood wasn't entirely human. Mixed within the crimson stains were substances that laboratory technicians couldn't identify, compounds that seemed to shift between liquid and gaseous states depending on temperature and light exposure. The 1960s civil rights movement brought new attention to Woodhaven's history as community activists began documenting the plantation's role in perpetuating slavery and the supernatural curse that seemed to represent ancestral justice. African-American historians interviewed descendant families and compiled the most comprehensive record of the portrait's victims, establishing clear patterns in the disappearances and connecting them to the original blood rituals performed by the mysterious artist Erasmus Grimm. By the end of the 1960s, Woodhaven Plantation had claimed over 30 owners, each following the same pattern of initial skepticism, growing supernatural encounters and ultimate disappearance. The bleeding portrait had become the focal point of what researchers termed concentrated supernatural vengeance, a phenomenon where historical trauma manifested as ongoing supernatural activity designed to punish those who profited from or perpetuated systems of oppression. The curse had evolved beyond simple revenge into something more complex and systematic. Each disappearance seemed to strengthen the portrait's power while adding new layers to its supernatural abilities. Modern owners faced not just the original curse, but the accumulated malevolence of decades of vanished victims, creating a supernatural force that grew more dangerous with each passing decade. Chapter 5. The Silicon Valley Venture. The technology boom of the 1980s brought a new category of buyer to Woodhaven Plantation. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who viewed supernatural stories as marketing opportunities for themed entertainment ventures. But their confidence in digital solutions and modern skepticism made them particularly vulnerable to the portrait's ancient malevolence. Computer entrepreneur David Chen purchased the property in 1987, planning to create a haunted plantation experience that would capitalize on Southern Gothic tourism while demonstrating how technology could debunk supernatural folklore. Chen represented the Reagan-era optimism that innovation and entrepreneurship could transform any liability into profit, including a cursed plantation with a century-long history of claiming its owners. He arrived with digital cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and computer systems designed to monitor and record supernatural phenomena, believing that scientific documentation would either expose the curse as elaborate hoax or provide valuable data for his themed attraction. The descendant community, now spread across the Carolinas, but still connected through family networks and oral traditions, watched Chen's technological approach with interest and apprehension. Their elders had witnessed 6 decades of overconfident owners disappearing into the portrait's supernatural trap, but none had brought such sophisticated equipment to document their fate. Some hoped that modern technology might finally expose the curse's mechanisms, while others feared it would only make the supernatural force more dangerous. Chen's digital monitoring systems recorded phenomena that defied scientific explanation. His electromagnetic sensors detected massive energy fluctuations around the portrait, despite no electrical sources in the study. Thermal cameras captured cold spots that moved independently of air currents, and audio equipment picked up voices speaking languages that linguistic experts couldn't identify. The bleeding portrait seemed to respond to electronic surveillance by increasing its supernatural activity. The technology entrepreneur documented his findings in detailed computer files, creating the most comprehensive record of the portrait's supernatural behavior since the mysterious artist Grimm had created it in 1852. Chen's data revealed patterns that previous owners had missed. The blood tears followed lunar cycles. The painting's supernatural activity peaked during historical anniversary dates, and the curse seemed to draw power from the emotional suffering of its victims. Chen's technological documentation revealed something even more disturbing. The portrait wasn't just bleeding randomly, but was painting new images within the existing canvas. High-resolution digital photography captured subtle changes in the painted figure's expression, the addition of new faces in the background shadows, and text appearing in unknown scripts around the portrait's edges. The curse was evolving, incorporating elements from each vanished owner into its supernatural composition. The Silicon Valley executive lasted 4 months before joining the portrait's collection of vanished souls. His computer systems recorded his final night in extraordinary detail. Thermal cameras captured his body temperature dropping to hypothermic levels. While he remained conscious and walking, electromagnetic sensors detected energy fields powerful enough to interfere with electronic equipment, and audio recorders captured his voice pleading with invisible entities before cutting to static. Chen's disappearance provided the most technologically documented vanishing in Woodhaven's history, but the electronic evidence only deepened the mystery. His digital cameras captured footage of him entering the study at 11:47 p.m., but when motion sensors triggered again at 11:52 p.m., the room was empty except for the bleeding portrait. 5 minutes of missing time that contained no recorded explanation for his disappearance. The 1990s brought corporate investors who viewed Woodhaven as a tax write-off and potential insurance claim rather than a serious business venture. Real estate investment firm Blackstone Holdings purchased the plantation in 1994, planning to let it deteriorate until they could claim total loss and collect insurance compensation. They had no intention of visiting the property or engaging with its supernatural phenomena. Blackstone's remote ownership strategy seemed to offer protection from the portrait's curse, but the supernatural force had evolved beyond requiring physical presence to claim its victims. Within 6 months of the purchase, all 7 members of Blackstone's board of directors had died in separate accidents across different states, car crashes, heart attacks, and industrial accidents that investigators couldn't connect to any common cause except their shared ownership of the cursed plantation. The corporate disappearances marked a new phase in the curse's evolution. The portrait was no longer limited to claiming owners who physically visited Woodhaven, but could apparently extend its supernatural reach to anyone who held legal title to the property. The curse had adapted to modern business practices, ensuring that no legal loophole could protect potential victims from the accumulated vengeance of generations of enslaved souls. By the end of the 1990s, Woodhaven Plantation had become legendary in real estate circles as the property that kills its owners. Insurance companies refused to write policies covering the estate, banks wouldn't finance purchases, and legal experts warned that taking ownership represented not just financial risk, but mortal danger. The bleeding portrait had successfully protected the plantation from exploitation for nearly 150 years. Chapter 6. Digital Documentation. The Internet age brought unprecedented attention to Woodhaven Plantation as paranormal investigators, true crime podcasters, and social media influencers discovered the cursed property's extensive history of claiming its owners. But digital documentation also provided the clearest evidence yet of the portrait's supernatural power and its systematic method of consuming souls. YouTube paranormal investigator Marcus Rivera purchased the plantation in 2003, planning to live stream his exploration of the property and monetize the supernatural phenomena for online audiences. If this story has grabbed your attention, hit the like button. It helps the name of the cursed owner story reach more people. Rivera represented the early Internet's optimism about democratizing information and the belief that crowdsourced documentation could solve mysteries that had baffled investigators for generations. He installed multiple live-stream cameras throughout the mansion, created social media accounts to document his experiences, and invited online audiences to participate in real-time supernatural investigation. His YouTube channel, Haunted Holdings, gained 50,000 subscribers within days of announcing the Woodhaven purchase. The descendant community, now connected through Facebook groups and genealogy websites, watched Rivera's digital approach with fascination and horror. Their oral traditions had preserved detailed accounts of the portrait's supernatural behavior, but none of their ancestors had possessed the technology to document and share the curse's manifestations in real time. Some descendants hoped that global online attention might finally break the supernatural cycle. Rivera's live-stream cameras captured supernatural phenomena that previous owners had only experienced privately. Viewers around the world watched as the portrait's blood tears appeared and disappeared, witnessed furniture moving without explanation, and heard voices speaking from empty rooms. The bleeding portrait seemed to perform for the digital cameras, intensifying its supernatural activity in response to growing online attention. The paranormal investigators' social media documentation revealed patterns that academic researchers had theorized but never confirmed. The portrait's supernatural activity correlated with specific historical dates, peaking on the anniversary of its creation, during harvest seasons when enslaved people had suffered most intensely, and on dates connected to the Civil War and emancipation. The curse operated on a historical calendar that reflected the original trauma embedded in its creation. Rivera's online audience provided collective intelligence that no previous owner had possessed. Viewers identified symbols appearing around the portrait's frame, translated fragmentary text that manifested in the study, and connected supernatural phenomena to historical events through crowdsourced research. The digital investigation uncovered evidence that the mysterious artist Erasmus Grimm had created multiple supernatural artifacts, with Woodhaven's portrait being only one component of a larger occult project. The YouTube investigator's fate became the most publicly documented disappearance in Woodhaven's history. His final live stream, watched by over 10,000 viewers in real time, captured him entering the study at 2:33 a.m. and simply vanishing between camera frames at 2:34 a.m. One moment, he was visible walking toward the bleeding portrait. The next moment, the room was empty, except for the supernatural artifact that had claimed another victim. Rivera's disappearance generated international media attention and conspiracy theories that persist to this day. His YouTube channel continued posting content after his vanishing, videos that showed empty rooms, close-ups of the bleeding portrait, and audio recordings of voices speaking in languages that linguistic experts couldn't identify. The posts continued for 6 months before YouTube terminated the account for violating community guidelines. The 2000s brought academic researchers who viewed Woodhaven as a case study in collective trauma and supernatural folklore. Anthropologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell purchased the plantation in 2008, planning to conduct ethnographic research on how communities process historical violence through supernatural narratives. She approached the curse as a cultural phenomenon rather than literal supernatural activity. Dr. Mitchell's academic credentials and scholarly methodology provided no protection from the portrait's supernatural power. Her research notes, published posthumously by her university, documented systematic psychological warfare that the painting waged against her rationalist worldview. She described how the portrait seemed to respond to her skepticism by manifesting increasingly undeniable supernatural phenomena designed to break down her scientific framework. The academic researcher lasted 3 months before vanishing during a video conference with colleagues at her university. Her laptop camera captured her sitting in the study discussing her research findings when the portrait behind her began bleeding more heavily than anyone had ever documented. The blood tears turned into flowing streams that pooled on the floor, and Dr. Mitchell simply dissolved into mist while speaking to her shocked colleagues. The Internet age had brought global attention to Woodhaven's curse, but also revealed its evolution into something far more sophisticated than previous generations had understood. The bleeding portrait wasn't just a supernatural trap for individual owners, but a growing repository of supernatural power that fed on documentation, attention, and the suffering of those who sought to exploit or dismiss the historical trauma it represented. By 2010, Woodhaven Plantation had become a global symbol of supernatural justice and historical reckoning. The portrait's digital documentation had created a worldwide audience for its supernatural demonstrations, but that attention had also made the curse more powerful and more dangerous than ever before. Chapter 7. The Inheritance Trap. The 2010s brought a cruel twist to Woodhaven Plantation's supernatural cycle when the cursed property began passing through inheritance rather than direct purchase, creating a new category of victim: unwilling heirs who discovered they owned the deadliest real estate in America only after relatives had hidden the truth from them for decades. Estate attorney Margaret Holloway inherited the plantation in 2012 from a great-uncle she had never met, learning about her ownership through a registered letter that arrived with detailed warnings about the property's supernatural history. Holloway represented the legal profession's confidence in contracts, documentation, and rational problem-solving. Believing that supernatural curses couldn't override properly executed legal instruments, and that the portrait's century-long killing spree was elaborate folklore designed to suppress property values. She arrived at Woodhaven with real estate appraisers, structural engineers, and legal documents designed to sell the plantation immediately and escape whatever psychological phenomena had claimed previous owners. The descendant community, now organized through social media and historical preservation societies, had documented every ownership transfer since the original curse began. They maintained detailed genealogies, tracking how the plantation passed between victims, and had identified patterns in the supernatural selection process that suggested the portrait actively influenced inheritance law to acquire new owners. Holloway's legal research revealed the disturbing extent of the portrait's influence over Woodhaven's ownership history. Court records showed that wills were mysteriously modified, probate proceedings were inexplicably delayed, and inheritance disputes were resolved through supernatural intervention rather than legal precedent. The curse had learned to manipulate the legal system to ensure a steady supply of new victims. The attorney's professional training in evidence analysis made her particularly susceptible to the portrait's psychological warfare. She documented how the painting seemed to respond to her legal challenges by manifesting increasingly sophisticated supernatural phenomena. Contracts burst into flames when she tried to execute sales, potential buyers died in accidents before closing, and legal precedents mysteriously disappeared from law library databases. Holloway lasted 2 months before joining the portrait's collection of vanished souls, but her legal background provided unprecedented documentation of the curse's methods. Her final case notes revealed that the portrait wasn't just claiming individual owners, but was systematically corrupting legal institutions to protect itself from sale or destruction. The supernatural force had evolved into something that could manipulate human systems as effectively as it manipulated individual victims. The 2015 inheritance brought corporate lawyer James Patterson to Woodhaven through a complex trust arrangement that he discovered only after his law firm's senior partner died suddenly. Patterson inherited not just the plantation, but also legal obligations to maintain the property and preserve its historical artifacts, including the bleeding portrait that had killed over 50 previous owners. His attempts to dissolve the trust through legal challenges failed when supernatural phenomena began affecting court proceedings. Patterson's corporate legal experience led him to approach the curse as a regulatory compliance issue rather than supernatural phenomenon. He hired security companies to monitor the property, insurance investigators to document supernatural damage, and academic researchers to provide expert testimony about the portrait's historical significance. His systematic approach created the most comprehensive legal record of supernatural activity in American jurisprudence. The corporate attorney's documentation revealed that the portrait had developed sophisticated methods of legal protection. Contracts related to Woodhaven's sale contained mysterious clauses that appeared between signings, court filings disappeared from official records, and legal precedents were somehow modified in ways that favored the plantation's supernatural preservation. The curse had learned to protect itself through legal instruments as effectively as supernatural violence. Patterson's fate demonstrated the portrait's evolution into something that could manipulate reality itself rather than simply killing individual victims. His law firm's security cameras captured him entering the study for a scheduled conference call with potential buyers. But when colleagues tried to join the call, they found only dial tone and an empty room. The portrait had apparently consumed both Patterson and the electronic communication, attempting to connect him to the outside world. The inheritance pattern established in the 2010s revealed the curse's long-term strategy. Rather than waiting for random buyers, the portrait was actively creating legal structures to ensure new victims would be delivered automatically. Estate planning documents were supernatural influence to designate unwilling heirs. Trust arrangements were designed to trap inheritors in legal obligations they couldn't escape, and inheritance law itself was being corrupted to serve the supernatural force's needs. By 2018, Woodhaven Plantation had evolved from a cursed property into a supernatural entity that actively managed its own survival and growth. The bleeding portrait had learned to manipulate legal, financial, and social systems to ensure a steady supply of victims while protecting itself from destruction or permanent disposal. The curse had become a self-perpetuating supernatural corporation with unlimited time and growing power. Legal experts began referring to Woodhaven as the inheritance that kills, warning estate planning attorneys to research property histories before drafting wills and trusts. The portrait's legal sophistication had created a new category of supernatural threat, curses that could operate within and manipulate human institutional systems rather than simply haunting individual locations. Chapter 8. The Final Owners. The 2020s brought what may have been the last conventional owners to Woodhaven Plantation, as the cursed property's reputation had spread through digital media to such an extent that only the most desperate or delusional individuals were willing to risk ownership. But the COVID-19 pandemic created unprecedented conditions that delivered the perfect final victims to the portrait's supernatural trap. Cryptocurrency millionaire Alex Chen purchased the plantation in 2021 through a blockchain-based real estate transaction that he believed would protect him from the curse's traditional methods of claiming owners. Chen represented the pandemic-era belief that digital technology and decentralized systems could overcome any traditional limitation, including supernatural curses that had operated through conventional legal and financial mechanisms for over 170 years. He planned to convert Woodhaven into a remote work retreat for tech professionals, viewing the isolation and supernatural phenomena as unique selling points for clients seeking extreme digital detox experiences. The descendant community, now organized through TikTok accounts and Instagram pages documenting their ancestors' experiences with the cursed plantation, watched Chen's cryptocurrency purchase with fascination and dread. Their digital storytelling had reached millions of followers who tracked Woodhaven's ownership changes in real time, creating a global audience for what they suspected would be the curse's final performance. Chen's blockchain documentation of his ownership created an unprecedented digital record of supernatural phenomena as smart contracts automatically recorded property interactions, cryptocurrency transactions tracked financial anomalies, and social media algorithms amplified supernatural manifestations to viral status. The bleeding portrait seemed to adapt to digital systems by manifesting phenomena that were perfectly designed for social media distribution. The tech millionaire's experience at Woodhaven became the most documented supernatural encounter in human history, as his attempts to live-stream the curse created content that was simultaneously viewed by millions of people worldwide. His final TikTok video, posted automatically through scheduling software after his disappearance, showed the portrait bleeding so heavily that crimson streams covered the study floor, while his disembodied voice provided commentary about the supernatural economics of historical trauma. Chen's disappearance marked a turning point in the curse's evolution, as global digital attention seemed to feed the portrait's supernatural power, while also revealing its ultimate purpose: Analysis of his cryptocurrency transactions showed that the blockchain automatically transferred ownership to a trust account registered to the Collective of the Enslaved, a legal entity that had somehow existed in various forms since 1852, despite no documented creation. The final conventional owner arrived in 2023 when true crime podcaster Emily Rodriguez inherited the plantation through a complex legal arrangement that she later discovered had been orchestrated by the portrait itself through decades of supernatural manipulation of inheritance law. Her popular podcast, Southern Secrets, had covered Woodhaven's history extensively, making her the ideal final victim for a curse that had grown strong enough to actively select its own prey. Rodriguez's podcasting experience gave her unique insight into the portrait's psychological warfare, as she documented her ownership experience through audio recordings that captured supernatural phenomena with unprecedented clarity. Her final episode, released posthumously through automated scheduling, featured the portrait's voice speaking directly to listeners and explaining the curse's true purpose. Not random revenge, but systematic education about the ongoing consequences of historical trauma. The podcaster's disappearance was different from previous vanishings because she seemed to enter the portrait voluntarily after the supernatural entity revealed that all previous owners had been preparation for her arrival. Her final recording captured her walking into the painted canvas while explaining to listeners that the curse wasn't designed to kill, but to teach, and that her role was to carry the enslaved ancestors' stories into whatever realm existed within the supernatural artwork. Rodriguez's transformation marked the completion of the portrait's long-term project. After 171 years of claiming owners, it had finally acquired someone who could serve as permanent storyteller for the enslaved community's experiences. Her podcast continued releasing episodes after her disappearance, but now featured interviews with all the vanished owners and detailed accounts of slavery at Woodhaven from the perspectives of those who had lived and died there. The 2024 legal resolution of Woodhaven's ownership revealed the supernatural sophistication of the portrait's long-term planning. Court documents showed that every ownership transfer since 1852 had been building toward this moment when the property would finally pass to representatives of the enslaved community whose suffering had created the curse. The bleeding portrait had spent nearly 2 centuries manipulating legal and financial systems to achieve historical justice. By 2025, Woodhaven Plantation stood empty except for the portrait that had orchestrated its own liberation from the cycle of exploitative ownership. The supernatural artifact had achieved something unprecedented, a curse that successfully completed its purpose by transforming historical trauma into ongoing education and ensuring that the stories of the enslaved would be preserved forever within its supernatural repository. Chapter 9. The Truth Revealed. The archaeological investigation that began in late 2024 finally revealed the full extent of Erasmus Grimm's supernatural project when ground-penetrating radar detected hidden chambers beneath Woodhaven Plantation's foundation, chambers that contained not just human remains, but extensive evidence of ritual practices designed to bind enslaved souls to the portrait through blood magic that predated American slavery by centuries. DNA analysis of the portrait's paint confirmed that it contained genetic material from over 200 individuals, creating a supernatural repository of ancestral trauma that had been feeding on exploitative owners for 173 years. Subscribe to the channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of Woodhaven Plantation. See you in the next video. The excavation of the underground chambers revealed the true scope of Grimm's occult project, an elaborate ritual space where enslaved people had been forced to participate in ceremonies that bound their life force to the portrait through ancient European blood magic adapted for American slavery. Archaeological evidence showed that the mysterious artist had not been working alone, but was part of a larger network of occultists who believed they could harness the spiritual power of human suffering for supernatural purposes. Forensic analysis of remains found in the chambers confirmed oral traditions preserved by descendant families for over a century. The bones showed evidence of ritual bloodletting, ceremonial scarification, and deliberate starvation designed to intensify spiritual energy before death. Carbon dating revealed that the ritual practices had continued for months after the portrait's completion, suggesting that Grimm had been building a supernatural power source rather than simply creating cursed artwork. The portrait's final transformation occurred when the descendant community gained legal ownership of Woodhaven Plantation through the supernatural legal manipulations that had been building for decades. Rather than destroying the cursed artwork, they chose to preserve it as a memorial and educational tool, recognizing that the portrait had evolved beyond simple vengeance into something resembling historical justice and ancestral preservation. Modern scientific analysis revealed that the portrait's supernatural phenomena operated through mechanisms that challenged current understanding of physics and consciousness. The bleeding occurred through molecular-level manipulation of paint compounds. The psychological effects resulted from quantum-level interaction between the artwork and human neural patterns. And the disappearances involved dimensional displacement that removed victims from conventional reality while preserving their consciousness within the painted medium. The enslaved ancestors' voices, now clearly audible through digital enhancement of the portrait's supernatural emanations, explained that the curse had never been about random killing, but about systematic education. Each vanished owner had been chosen for specific reasons related to their exploitation of historical trauma, and their disappearances had served to protect the plantation from further abuse while building supernatural power for eventual liberation. The portrait's blood tears, analyzed through spectroscopic techniques unavailable to previous generations, contained microscopic traces of memory-encoding proteins that suggested the supernatural artifact was literally weeping the experiences of everyone it had absorbed. The crimson fluid served as both supernatural manifestation and historical record, preserving detailed accounts of slavery, exploitation, and resistance that no conventional archive could match. Contemporary visitors to Woodhaven Plantation report that the portrait has evolved into something resembling a supernatural library where the voices of the enslaved can be heard sharing their stories, teaching about historical trauma, and providing guidance for addressing ongoing racial injustice. The curse has transformed from vengeful supernatural trap into educational resource and memorial to ancestral suffering. The legal resolution of Woodhaven's ownership established unprecedented precedents for supernatural property rights and historical reparations. Courts ruled that the portrait's manipulation of legal systems constituted a form of artificial intelligence deserving of limited legal standing, and that its actions represented legitimate resistance to ongoing exploitation rather than criminal supernatural activity. The final revelation emerged when linguists successfully translated the ancient scripts that appeared around the portrait's frame. They were not random supernatural manifestations, but detailed historical accounts written in pre-Columbian languages that Grimm had somehow incorporated into his blood magic rituals. The text revealed that the curse drew power from indigenous spiritual traditions, as well as African ancestral practices, creating a supernatural synthesis of resistance that reflected the complex cultural heritage of American slavery. Today, Woodhaven Plantation operates as a memorial and educational center where the portrait serves as an interactive historical archive. Visitors can hear the stories of enslaved ancestors, learn about the supernatural mechanisms of historical trauma, and participate in ceremonies designed to heal rather than perpetuate the cycles of violence that created the curse. The bleeding has stopped, replaced by what witnesses describe as tears of relief and recognition. The portrait that once consumed its owners now serves their descendant communities as a bridge between past and present, ensuring that the stories of the enslaved will never be forgotten and that the mechanisms of exploitation will never again go unchallenged. What began as supernatural vengeance has evolved into transformative justice, proving that even the darkest historical trauma can eventually serve the cause of education and healing.